You are listening to the Cresco Wealthcast, and I'm your host, Dimitri Korolis. I'm an advisor with Cresco Wealth Management, a division of Wellington Altus Private Wealth. The purpose of this Wealthcast is really to bring those down-to-earth conversations that we're having not only with ourselves internally, but also with clients. Just want to bring you authentic, real coffee talk convos that we can all appreciate and understand. You can follow the podcast on Podbean, www.cresco.podbean.com, as well as my Instagram page on the Instagram stories and highlights, which is at the Finance Greek. Now, very rarely is this ever going to happen, but I think I kind of like it where my guest today, Peter Kollias, comes in and says, Dimitri, you're going to press the record button. I'm going to come in with a topic, and then we're going to take it from there. I love these. These are the fun ones. So what do you have today?
Well, I guess that's the problem. I don't have a topic in mind.
Oh,
so it makes it a bit challenging. What are we going to talk about? I'm kidding. You know, I was reading this article over the weekend, and the title of the article was Why We're Trapped in Short-Term Thinking and How Do We Take the Long View? And it caught my attention immediately. And I said to myself, you know what? This is what we do all the time. We sit back and say, let's not get caught up in the short term and let's take the long view, right? And there's a lot to be said for that because a lot of time over and over you hear, okay, you don't want to take a long-term approach. Well, what does that mean? Right?
I agree, Pete.
What does the long-term view mean? And sorry, just that article, you know, it was written by Richard Fisher for those that are interested. But, you know, a lot of times we say, well, I'll take the long view. And you'll hear these pundits come in on CNBC, BNN, Bloomberg, and they say, you know what, we're taking a long-term approach here. And then you see it's really a 6 to 12 month position.
And sometimes if it's even that long, it's incredible because these news outlets are meant to be day to day, hour to hour in some cases. I mean, there was a time where Chris and I, and for those who don't know, Chris, another colleague on the team, we watched the same analyst on CNBC give contradictory pieces of advice saying, get out of tech, and then on the Wednesday, you got to get into tech. What a great buying opportunity. It's incredible.
It is incredible. And so what I wanted to talk today was how we have purposely taken the approach to train ourselves to actually think for the long term. And us as human beings, we're just geared for what I'll term short-termism. I don't know if that's a word or not. But we are living in
It is now.
It is now. I mean, that's a great thing about these podcasts. So we can make up words but short-termism, right? And so then everything is predicated in today's world on let's focus on the presence. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? You know, let's be present in the moment. That's great. But is it to your advantage when you're talking about investing? We want to talk about the long term, and I'll tell you why we want to talk about the long term. But so us as human beings, you know, if you've got a 4-year-old daughter, I believe, or 5-year-old daughter.
5 and 2, yeah.
And then I've got an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old boy. And if you were asking them and say, hey, listen, what do you think it's going to be like to be a father? What do you think it's going to be like to be a mother? What do you think you're going to be doing when you're 40? You know, they think of 40 as being a grandparent, as being old. They have no idea what the long term is. In their mind, they think, again, next month or their birthday a year from there, that is what the long term is. It's just how we're built as human beings.
That's a fantastic point, Pete, because if you think about it, on the one hand, it does come down to experience. And I'm not a firm believer that age is what creates wisdom, but there definitely is wisdom in age because for us, you know, okay, 5-year-old, and to say, okay, Calliope, I can give her the timeline of, let's say, what school would look like and things to focus up until graduation, because we've been there, we've done that, we understand it, and we can do that. And then as she gets older, she'll be able to provide it. And the hard part and I think to your point, is it doesn't matter how old someone is. We can have 40 plus years of experience. trying to navigate at any point in your life to places you've never been before, it's hard to put a timeline to it.
Absolutely, and that's such a wonderful point. Is we've had this experience, we've had this growth, and we've lived those years, and they don't understand it. Just like you and I don't really have an understanding what our next 20, 30 years may look like.
And this is us admitting our parents were right.
That's right, right. And then you go through and you live it. I'm like, oh, now I know exactly what my parents are talking about. But that ties into everything that we're talking about here today. Is that one thing that we have, and I was trying to find a term for it, is one hack that we have, one benefit that we have as financial professionals, is we have a pretty clear understanding where the future is going to be for the strategy of our investments, right? And you might say to yourself, well, that's a pretty bold statement here, Pete. What are you talking about, right? And so I started in this business 23 years ago, right? So 23 years ago, I started in this business. Can you tell me what the S&P 500 was 23 years ago?
You know what? I'm going to claim ignorant and say no.
No.
Because I do, but I'm going to take the standpoint to say most people just don't.
Most people just don't, right? And so today, the S&P 500 is 3,997, give or take, right? Whatever it closed at today. When I started in 2000, I started in 2020, but we'll say 20 years ago. So March 2020, 2003, it's hard to believe that long ago, the S&P 500 was 848, right? Moved from 848 to 4,000. That's taking the long-term view. Yeah. And if you go back to the 1930s, the 1950s, it was lower than 848. What's my point? My point of the thing is that if the world continues to grow, which it has historically and has never missed, that we know what's going to happen in the long term, which is in the long term, the global economies will continue to grow, human beings will continue to innovate, and human beings will continuously wrong about what the future is because we are innovative human beings that are always trying to find a better way to grow, right?
Yeah.
And just adding to that, Thomas Watson's founder of IBM, he said basically when you created the company, maybe there's a market for 5 personal computers in all of the world. And now people have 5 personal computers in their house, not the whole world in their house, right?
That's right.
You probably remember growing up, I remember going through school saying, you know what, we're going to be running out of oil by 2005. And this was, I dated myself, but this is the 1980s. Yeah. We had abundance of oil, right? The point I'm trying to make is us as human beings, there was with a famine as well. We're going to have famine. There's not going to be enough food. We won't be able to feed 5 billion people, right? Yeah. Now with integrated or vertical farming that's happening, all these technologies that are coming down, the ability for humans to innovate, there's always growth that's being found. We can never underestimate where the human spirit is going to go. There's no way you and I can understand what's going to happen in 50 years' time, right? Just like you and I never believed that we'd be able to watch TV on a phone, right? We were watching it on those big Zenith boxes.
Absolutely. It's to the point where the cartoon, the Jetsons, something, again, we're aging ourselves, but cartoon, the Jetsons that we grew up with, these concepts, not only, outside of flying cars, I get it, but when you look at video conferencing, holographic imaging, Star Trek is another example too, like just these where you look, it's so far-fetched, and then you say, hold on, we have these tablets, we have this, and we're living in the now. It's hard. And, I'm going to bring a question to you, which ultimately will get asked at some point in time or the other. And it's one to say, okay, long-term view, I get it. But what if I don't have long-term, Pete? I'm 75 years old. I don't have the proverbial long-term. What do you say to that, afterwards?
That's a great point. But in order to get to where you were at 75, you've taken that long-term approach, right? And the reality is you still have to take the long-term. And what I mean by that is that your money is going to outlive you.
Yeah.
And so then what's the long-term view on that? Is it go down to the next generation? And how do you take that next 100-year generational view? And so, we talk about a 20-year time horizon, and I'm just going back to using that one more time, is, if let's say in 20 years' time I want to be retired, I've got this long-term approach and say, okay, I've got 20 years ahead of me. I got to take that long-term approach. But the reality is, Dimitri, when I retire, do I need to pull my money out of the account at that point? Well, no, my money's just getting started at that point, and hopefully I have another 30 years on top of that. I don't. I probably only have another 10 years, let's be honest. But you understand what I'm saying is it doesn't end. The money continues to flow. So this is really taking that long-term approach that people have troubles. And we're so lucky to have the empirical evidence to suggest, actually, we have a pretty good idea where the long term is going to go.
Yeah, it's a good point. And, there's a big difference between completely changing a strategy. I'm talking the 180 overhaul to staying disciplined. And yes, maybe making certain tactical alterations, if we'll call it, to say, okay, but it's to complement, not supplement what someone is doing and unraveling. And it's a behavioral thing. You just mentioned something, and you're 100% right. And it's incredible that a lot of what we say and what we see is there and has been shown to us time and time again. The biggest difference, and this is where I'll pat ourselves on the back, is that as advisors, we can advise, but we have to have those safeguards internally for us as well to be able to stay disciplined. And that's one thing I love that we do at Cresco, is to say, hey, okay, look, yes, we are the professionals in the room. We're the smartest people in the room, and we can advise, but we have to advise ourselves and make sure that we adhere to that type of discipline. I find one of the biggest misses in the industry is the need for advisors to create more work to make them themselves look smarter.
Right, and that's exactly it. And we've talked about this is being actively patient. Right, what does that mean? It's really hard to be patient sometimes when you have this approach to be okay in the present, in the now, in the noise. And we hold each other accountable. We sit down second Tuesday of every month. We have our Cresco investment committee, and we say, okay, well, hold on. Are we moving outside of our principles of the long-term view here? But I mean, to your point, it's also about the risk management, right? So we've got the long-term view, but then how do we make tactical shifts to make sure that we're also being risk managed on our portfolio? I just want to re-emphasize the point here as well. Some more periods here is, if I were to come to you and say, listen, okay, if you're going to put your money in an investment that for the most part that you're going to have a positive return in 10 or 20 years, you would probably be very comfortable with that, right? So I just want to show, again, I can't show. It's kind of tough to do on a podcast.
This is where we put the cheap plug of coming into the office? Is this what we do?
Sure, yeah.
We could show you if you come down to our offices.
Right. So let's use time as on our side, and let's just take some empirical evidence to suggest what we're talking about, taking a long-term approach. Reminders that we always tell each other, particularly in moments when you have these certain woes that become the noise of the day, is we say, okay, if we're in an asset allocation model and you hold that money in an asset allocation model, after a 5-year period, you're going to have a rate of return anywhere between 0.2 to 25.3%. So you're in the positive. After a 10-year period, you're going to be anywhere between 2.3% to 17%. So you're in the positive. In a 20-year period, you're going to be anywhere between 5.4% to 15.75%. I don't want to get caught up in the numbers. I just want to show and reflect that over the long term, you're held in positive, right? Because it's all held relative based upon what's happening in inflation and happening with the world at the time.
And for those that are listening, you're going to say, well, those are... Thanks, geniuses. Those are very widespread. Why would you bring before we go down the rabbit hole of the asset allocation itself? I think what I'm getting out of what you're trying to present here, Pete, is to say, listen, overall, okay, before we get into the nitty gritty of what do you have in fixed income equities, alternatives, so on and so forth, it's a positive number.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to say is, what we always repeat to ourselves is we just want to have the strategy in place, be patient, be diligent, and take that long-term approach because we have solid proof that it's there. It's one of the greatest things that we have to our advantage is where else can you say we have a really strong belief and conviction as to where we know our strategy will be in the long term if we stay disciplined and patient. And it's so hard these days not to be disciplined and patient given everything that's coming at us. And it's great to have these reminders. This was a great article to read on the long term. Yeah. Like I said, a lot of people can't get the long term right because they can't vision it. They don't know what it is. But here we are, and we can look at people in the eyes and say, listen, here's some great empirical evidence as to where we believe there's a strong trajectory where the long term will be.
Very well said, Pete, and I appreciate your time as always. And I would be remiss not to mention that we're open to these conversations. The point of the podcast, again, is to have these coffee talk type of conversations, help invoke thoughts for you, the listener. We're always there to be in touch. Most people don't know the amount of risk they're taking, or some people just wanted the assessment for the amount of risk they're taking. We understand that. But please like and subscribe, follow on the channel, which would be fantastic, and looking forward for the next ones to come. And of course, any suggestions or anything that you would like us to talk about from our perspective, you are more than welcome to let us know. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Dimitri, always a pleasure.
Love it.